long before historians transformed the Whitechapel murders into endless speculation, and long before generations argued over the identity of the world's most infamous unseen killer. An old legend drifted quietly along the western coast of Ireland. It was never written in church records, never preserved by the authorities, and never repeated beyond a handful of fishermen who dismissed it as another tale born from storms and whiskey. Yet beneath the salt and silence rested a possibility that history had forgotten, one that began on a grey autumn morning when a solitary vessel emerged from a curtain of Atlantic mist and carried with it a darkness that had already stained the streets of London. The fishing village sat where jagged cliffs surrendered to a narrow crescent of black sand, protected only by weathered stone cottages and the stubborn resolve of families who had harvested the sea for generations. The ocean ruled every hour of their lives. It decided whether nets returned heavy with cod or empty enough to bring hunger. It determined which sons returned from the tides and which names would be carved into worn cemetery stones overlooking the surf. Outsiders seldom visited. The coastline was dangerous, the currents unpredictable, and every sailor understood that better harbors waited farther south. Even so, strange vessels occasionally appeared after storms, carrying merchants, drifters, or desperate souls escaping troubles they never cared to explain. One such traveler stepped ashore shortly before dawn. He appeared ordinary enough. A long dark coat concealed a lean frame hardened by years of wandering. A broad hat shaded much of his face, while a neatly trimmed beard disguised sharper features beneath. He carried little beyond a leather satchel and moved with remarkable calm, thanking no one, asking no questions, and accepting a rented room with coins that seemed unusually clean for a traveler who claimed to have crossed rough seas. The villagers noticed him because strangers always attracted attention, but within days curiosity faded. He remained polite, worked occasionally repairing nets or chopping wood, and wandered alone along the cliffs each evening before darkness settled across the sea. Farther inland lived a man named Alan, known throughout the village simply as the Quiet Fisherman. His cottage stood apart from the others, near a lonely stream bordered by twisted ash trees. Alan possessed neither remarkable education nor wealth. He could barely read beyond simple passages from an old family Bible, yet he understood tides, animal tracks, weather patterns, and the countless subtle signs that nature offered to anyone patient enough to observe them. Children considered him gentle. Fishermen respected his work ethic. Priests appreciated his silence. No one imagined that the same ordinary man would one day become the final obstacle standing before a monster whose name would terrify future generations. The first disappearance caused concern, but not panic. A young sailor failed to return after drinking in a neighboring settlement. His empty boat eventually drifted ashore several miles north, convincing many that the sea had claimed another victim. Such tragedies were painfully common. The Atlantic had consumed stronger men than him, and grieving families accepted nature's cruelty because resisting it changed nothing. Then another man vanished. Unlike the first, this fisherman disappeared while walking home through fields only minutes from the village. His lantern was discovered smashed beside a stone wall, though there were no footprints suggesting a struggle. Search parties combed the surrounding countryside without success. Priests organized prayers. Families remained indoors after sunset. Unease spread quietly through the cottages as whispers replaced confident explanations. Several days later, the sea returned what the land refused to reveal. The body washed against a reef during low tide, tangled among strands of kelp and shattered driftwood. Experienced fishermen had witnessed drownings before, yet nothing prepared them for what rested upon those rocks. The corpse had not merely died. It had been deliberately opened with chilling anatomical precision. Deep wounds crossed the abdomen and chest in patterns unlike anything local hunters had ever inflicted upon livestock. Certain organs were missing entirely, while other injuries suggested the killer possessed both extraordinary confidence and disturbing familiarity with the human body. The village priest called it evil. The older fishermen called it something worse. Alan said nothing. Instead, he stood near the cliffs, studying details everyone else overlooked. The dead man's boots remained unusually clean despite the rocky shoreline. Tiny flecks of black city soot clung beneath torn fabric, where only careful observation revealed them. A faint medicinal odor lingered around the wounds despite days spent in seawater. None of it fit the world Alan knew. Their village produced fishermen, shepherds, blacksmiths, and labourers. It did not produce killers capable of carving flesh with almost surgical precision. Weeks passed, and fear settled over the coastline like permanent fog. Families barred doors before sunset. Boats returned earlier from fishing grounds. Livestock refused certain wooded paths, startling easily whenever evening approached. More bodies appeared, each displaying the same horrifying signature. Rumors spread faster than seabirds. Some blamed ancient spirits dwelling beneath forgotten ruins. Others insisted a demon had crossed the sea searching for fresh souls. A few whispered that punishment had arrived for sins too old to remember. Alan believed none of it. He trusted patterns instead. He noticed the killings followed no random rhythm. Each victim disappeared after heavy fog blanketed the coast. Every body eventually surfaced, where Atlantic currents naturally converged before drifting inland. Whoever committed these murders understood movement, patience, and concealment. More importantly, the killer remained alive long enough after each crime to transport victims without attracting attention. One rainy afternoon, Alan walked beyond the harbor toward abandoned sea caves carved into the cliffs centuries earlier. Fishermen rarely visited them because collapsing rock made the tunnels dangerous. Yet fresh footprints interrupted the muddy path leading toward the entrance. They belonged to expensive leather boots rather than the thick work footwear common throughout the village. Inside, darkness swallowed nearly every sound except distant waves crashing through submerged passages. Alan carried only a lantern and a fish-cutting knife hanging from his belt. The cave extended farther than expected until natural chambers opened beneath towering ceilings streaked with mineral veins that shimmered faintly in the lantern's glow. There he discovered evidence no storm could explain. Folded carefully inside an oilcloth rested newspaper pages from London, describing a murderer who had vanished after terrorizing Whitechapel. Though Alan struggled to read every word, one headline appeared repeatedly beside crude illustrations of crowded streets and frightened policemen. The articles described bodies mutilated with impossible precision, organs removed, and authorities pursuing an invisible killer known only by a name that seemed almost unreal. Jack the Ripper. Alan stared at the drawings before looking toward blood-stained surgical instruments arranged neatly beside the newspapers. The same dark leather satchel carried by the mysterious traveler rested nearby. Understanding arrived not as shock, but as cold certainty. The stranger from the boat had never escaped London. London had escaped him. For the first time since arriving in Ireland, the hunter realized someone else had begun following his trail. The killings stopped for several nights. Alan suspected the murderer understood he had been discovered. Every instinct urged him to warn the village, yet proof remained hidden inside the caves, and accusing a stranger without evidence could easily divide the frightened community. Instead, he quietly prepared himself the only way he knew. He sharpened the same heavy gutting knives used each fishing season to clean enormous Atlantic cod. He repaired old rope nets. He studied tides and isolated stretches of shoreline where few witnesses ever ventured. The confrontation arrived beneath a moonless sky as dense fog rolled inland from the sea. Alan spotted the stranger moving silently between abandoned smokehouses, carrying another unconscious victim across his shoulder. There was no hesitation now. Every mystery dissolved beneath undeniable truth. The chase crossed slippery rocks, narrow cliff paths, and crashing surf. Jack moved with terrifying speed, abandoning his victim to escape deeper toward the sea caves where darkness offered countless hiding places. Alan pursued relentlessly, navigating terrain familiar since childhood while the fugitive stumbled across unfamiliar ledges slick with algae and seawater. Inside the cavern, both men disappeared into echoing darkness, illuminated only by flickering lantern light, reflecting across underground pools. Ancient stone pillars divided the chamber into shifting shadows, where predator and hunter exchanged roles with every cautious step. Jack's surgical blade flashed repeatedly through the darkness, each strike calculated with lethal precision. Alan answered not with elegance, but with relentless strength earned from decades hauling nets, lifting anchors, and battling Atlantic storms. The struggle eventually forced both men onto a narrow rock shelf, overlooking churning seawater far below. Waves exploded against the cliff face with thunderous force, shaking loose ancient fragments of stone. Jack lunged once more, but the polished blade glanced harmlessly across thick oilskin clothing instead of flesh. Alan seized his wrist, twisting until the weapon vanished into the roaring water beneath. The fisherman then reached for the only tool his hands understood completely: his heavy fish gutting knife. There was nothing ceremonial about what followed. No speeches, no declarations, and no triumphant justice delivered before witnesses. Only survival. The same practiced motions that generations of fishermen had used to prepare their daily catch now became instruments of grim necessity. Alan overpowered the exhausted murderer and opened him with swift, brutal efficiency, ensuring the killer who had butchered innocent lives would never again lift a blade against another soul. The cave echoed briefly with the crashing sea before silence reclaimed every shadow. By dawn, the village found neither Jack nor Alan. The rescued victim survived, though unable to explain much beyond fragments of terror hidden beneath lingering fever. Alan returned home quietly after cleaning every trace of blood from his clothing in freezing tidal pools. Before sunrise, he loaded a small rowing boat with heavy stones wrapped inside old fishing nets. Far beyond the familiar fishing grounds, where Atlantic depths swallowed entire shipwrecks without leaving evidence behind, Alan committed his final act. He secured the weighted body beneath the tangled nets and lowered it slowly into the endless black water. No grave marker identified the resting place. No priest offered prayers. No investigation followed. Currents embraced the corpse before darkness consumed it, forever beneath thousands of feet of silent ocean. Life gradually returned to normal. The killings ended. Fishing nets filled once again. Children laughed outside cottages. Years became decades. London's investigators continued searching for a phantom who had already disappeared beyond every map they would ever examine. Scholars debated countless suspects. Detectives wrote books. Historians argued over impossible theories. Entire generations became captivated by the mystery of the vanished killer who seemed to dissolve into history without leaving a final trace. Alan never corrected them. He married, grew old, buried friends, watched grandchildren inherit the same boats, and carried his secret with unwavering resolve. Even in old age, when memory abandoned many details of his youth, one truth remained locked behind tired eyes. Some monsters deserved neither recognition nor legend. Some evils ended best beneath crushing darkness, where no curious hands could ever disturb them again. When Alan finally died, after a lifetime defined by quiet simplicity, villagers remembered him only as a hard-working fisherman who rarely spoke more than necessary and always respected the sea. They never imagined that the same weathered hands which cleaned countless fish had also ended one of history's greatest mysteries. And somewhere beneath the cold Atlantic, where sunlight has never reached and forgotten wrecks sleep beneath endless silence, the last unanswered question surrounding Jack the Ripper remains hidden forever beneath drifting currents, tangled nets, and the unforgiving embrace of the sea.